She stood in the boarding line wearing a faded hoodie and running shoes, clutching a worn leather bag. To the flight crew of Skyline Airways, Flight 492, Dr. Beatrice Washington looked like she didn't belong in the same zip code as first class, let alone seat 1A. They sneered, they blocked her path, and they tried to humiliate her in front of 200 people. They thought they held all the power at 30,000 feet. But they didn't know who was signing their paychecks, nor did they realize that the woman they were bullying was the only person on board who could save the captain's life. By the time the wheels touched the tarmac, careers would end, and a legend would begin. The fluorescent hum of Chicago O'Hare's Terminal 3 was a headache-inducing drone that Dr. Beatrice Washington usually knew how to tune out. But today was different. Today, the noise felt like it was scraping against the inside of her skull. Beatrice Bay, to her friends, though she had precious few of them these days, shifted her weight from one tired foot to the other. She pulled the hood of her oversized, charcoal gray sweatshirt further over her head. It was a comfortable piece of clothing, bought from a university gift shop 10 years ago, frayed at the cuffs and smelling faintly of antiseptic and old coffee. To anyone passing by, she looked like an exhausted student or perhaps a weary mother catching a red-eye flight. She was neither. She was the chief of neurotrauma at Johns Hopkins, and she had just come off a 36-hour shift that involved removing a glioblastoma from the brainstem of a 7-year-old boy. She was exhausted in a way that sleep couldn't fix. She needed silence. She needed a glass of expensive bourbon. And most of all, she needed the first-class seat she had paid $3,000 for just 2 hours ago. The gate area for Skyline Airways Flight 492 to London was a chaotic sea of rolling suitcases and impatient travelers. The winter storm outside had delayed the incoming aircraft, and the tension in the waiting area was palpable. B stood near the red carpet designated for Skyline Elite and first-class passengers. She just wanted to board, put on her noise-canceling headphones, and disappear. Behind the podium stood Greg Poulos. Greg was a man who wore his uniform like armor. His name tag was polished to a shine. His tie was knotted so tightly it looked like it was restricting oxygen to his brain, and his hair was gelled into an immovable helmet. Greg loved rules. More specifically, Greg loved enforcing rules on people he deemed disorderly. He looked up from his computer screen, scanning the crowd. His eyes slid over the businessmen in their crisp suits, the wealthy tourists with their Louis Vuitton luggage, and landed squarely on Beatrice. He frowned. B stepped forward as the boarding announcement crackled overhead. "We are now inviting our first-class passengers and Diamond Medallion members to board at this time." She moved toward the scanner, her phone in hand, with the digital boarding pass displayed. "Excuse me, ma'am," Greg said. His voice wasn't loud, but it had a cutting, nasal quality that carried. He didn't look at her face, he looked at her hoodie. "Boarding is currently restricted to first class only. Zone 4 and 5 will be called in approximately 20 minutes. Please step aside." B blinked, her reaction time slowed by fatigue. "I know," she said, her voice raspy. "I'm in first." Greg let out a short, sharp sigh, a sound of performative patience. He leaned over the podium, offering a tight, patronizing smile. "Ma'am, please don't make this difficult. The lane is for priority passengers. You're blocking the way for the people who paid for this service. Please wait in the general boarding area until your group is called." Behind Bea, a tall man in a bespoke Navy suit checked his Rolex and cleared his throat loudly. "I have a first-class ticket," Bea repeated, extending her phone toward the scanner. "If you'll just scan it." Greg put his hand over the scanner, physically blocking it. The smile vanished. "I'm not going to ask you again. You are causing a scene. Step back, or I will have security remove you from the gate area." The air around them seemed to freeze. Several passengers nearby stopped talking to watch. It was the tone, the absolute, unwavering assumption that she was lying. Beatrice felt a familiar heat rise in her chest, the same heat she felt when hospital administrators asked if she was the janitorial staff while she was wearing a white coat. "My name is Dr. Beatrice Washington," she said, straightening her spine. Despite the hoodie, she stood with the authority of a woman who held human lives in her hands daily. "I am in seat 1A. Remove your hand from the scanner." Greg laughed. It was a genuine chuckle of disbelief. "Dr. Washington?" "Right. And I'm the King of England. Look, lady, I don't know what game you're playing, but is there a problem here?" The man in the Navy suit stepped up. He was older, with silver hair and a face etched with the kind of lines that came from making hard decisions. Greg's demeanor flipped instantly. He stood straighter, his voice turning syrupy. "So sorry for the delay, Mr. Henderson. Just dealing with some confusion in the queue. This passenger is confused about her zone." The man, Mr. Henderson, looked at Beatrice. He didn't look at her hoodie. He looked at her eyes. He saw the exhaustion, but he also saw the steel. Then he looked at the phone in her hand, which clearly displayed the bold letters 1A. "She has a boarding pass," Henderson said, his voice deep and gravelly. "Why don't you just scan it and see?" Greg flushed a mottled pink. He couldn't very well refuse a Diamond Medallion member. With a sneer, he moved his hand. "Fine, go ahead. But when it beeps red, you're going to the back of the line." B didn't say a word. She placed her phone under the laser. Beep beep. A cheerful green light flashed. The machine chirped, "Welcome aboard, Dr. Washington." The silence that followed was louder than the terminal. Greg stared at the screen, his mouth slightly open. He looked like a fish gasping for air. B didn't gloat. She didn't smirk. She simply retrieved her phone, looked Greg dead in the eye, and said, "It's doctor, not lady." She walked down the jet bridge, her heart rate spiking not from excitement, but from anger. She hoped the flight crew would be better. She was wrong. The transition from the cold jet bridge to the warm, pressurized cabin of the Boeing 777 usually brought a sense of relief. Beatrice stepped onto the plane, clutching her worn leather bag close to her chest. Inside that bag was the only thing that mattered right now. A prototype medical device she was transporting to London for emergency FDA equivalent approval, and a letter from her late father. Standing at the galley entrance was Sheila Garner. If Greg Poulos was the gatekeeper of the terminal, Sheila Garner was the tyrant of the skies. She had been flying for Skyline for 25 years, and somewhere along the line, the romance of travel had curdled into a bitter resentment of anyone she deemed difficult. She wore her uniform with severe precision, scarf knotted perfectly, red lipstick applied like war paint, and a blonde bob that didn't move an inch. Sheila was currently laughing with the co-pilot, a young man named Dave, but her expression hardened the moment she saw Beatrice. Beatrice stepped into the first-class cabin. It was spacious, with lie-flat pods and soft ambient lighting. Her seat, 1A, was the prime spot on the left side. She moved toward it, ready to collapse into the soft leather. "Whoa, hold on there." Sheila's voice snapped like a whip. She stepped out from the galley, physically blocking the aisle with her body. Beatrice stopped, nearly bumping into the flight attendant. "Excuse me?" "Boarding pass," Sheila demanded, her hand extended, palm up. She didn't say please, she didn't say welcome. Her eyes raked over Beatrice's sneakers and the frayed cuffs of her hoodie. "I already scanned it at the gate," Beatrice said, trying to keep her voice level. "I'm in 1A. Sheila rolled her eyes, a theatrical gesture meant for the co-pilot to see. "We have a double booking situation today, and I need to verify." "Let me see it." Beatrice unlocked her phone again and held it up. Sheila snatched the phone from her hand, a violation of personal space that made Beatrice flinch. Sheila stared at the screen for a long time, tapping it as if trying to find a flaw in the digital code. "This doesn't look right," Sheila muttered. "System says 1A is reserved for a VIP. You don't look like a VIP." "I paid full fare," Beatrice said. "Can I please just sit down? I've been up for 2 days." Sheila handed the phone back with a grimace. "Fine. But that bag," she pointed a manicured finger at Beatrice's leather satchel, "can't go in the overhead bin. The bins in first are reserved for suit jackets and hard-shell rollers. You'll have to check it." "It fits under the seat," Beatrice argued, "and it contains sensitive medical equipment. I cannot check it." "It's too big for under the seat in the pods," Sheila lied. It was a blatant lie. The pods had massive ottomans with storage underneath, and the bins are full. Beatrice looked at the empty overhead bins. "They are literally empty. They are reserved," Sheila hissed, stepping closer. "Look, I don't know how you got this ticket. Maybe you used your boyfriend's miles or got a lucky upgrade, but in this cabin, we follow rules. You want to sit here? You give me the bag to check, or you find space in economy." Beatrice felt her hands trembling. It wasn't fear. It was the adrenaline of confrontation when you are too tired to fight but have no choice. "I am a neurosurgeon. This bag stays with me. If you force me to check it, and the equipment is damaged, Skyline Airways will be liable for millions of dollars. Do you want to take that risk? Sheila's face turned a shade of crimson that clashed with her lipstick. She hated being challenged. She hated it even more coming from someone who looked like Beatrice. Don't you threaten me, Sheila said, her voice raising an octave. I can have you removed for aggression. Is that what you want? To be dragged off? Is there a problem, Sheila? The captain had emerged from the cockpit. Captain Frederick Fred Miller was a large man with a thick mustache and an air of indifference. He looked at Sheila, then at Beatrice. She's refusing to comply with baggage policies, Captain, Sheila said immediately, playing the victim. And she's being aggressive. I don't feel safe. Captain Miller looked at Beatrice. He saw a black woman in a hoodie arguing with his lead flight attendant. He didn't ask for her side of the story. He didn't ask about the bag. Ma'am, Miller said, his voice bored. Do as the crew says, or get off my plane. We have a schedule to keep. Beatrice looked around. The other first-class passengers were boarding now. Mr. Henderson, the man from the gate, was settling into seat 2A, just behind her. He was watching intently, his brow furrowed. Beatrice realized she had two choices: get kicked off and miss the conference that could save her career and the patent hearing, or swallow her pride. I will put it under my legs, Beatrice whispered. It won't touch the bin, Sheila smirked. It was a victory smile. Fine, but if I see it sticking out even an inch, it's going in the hold. Sit down, you're blocking the aisle. Beatrice squeezed past Sheila, who didn't move an inch to make room, forcing Beatrice to brush against the galley wall. She collapsed into seat 1A, clutching the bag to her chest like a shield. She didn't take off her hoodie. She felt cold, exposed, and utterly small. She didn't know that Sheila wasn't done with her yet, not even close. The flight to London was 8 hours long. For Beatrice, it was shaping up to be 8 hours of psychological warfare. Once the plane reached cruising altitude, the seatbelt sign pinged off. The cabin filled with the soft clinking of china and crystal as the flight attendants began the drink service. Sheila moved through the cabin with the grace of a swan until she reached row 1. She poured champagne for Mr. Henderson in 2, chatting amiably about the weather in London. She offered a hot towel to the woman in 1F with a beaming smile. Then she reached Beatrice. Beatrice had her tray table down and was reviewing notes on her iPad. She didn't look up, not wanting to engage. Sheila walked right past her. Beatrice waited 5 minutes. She was thirsty. Her throat felt like sandpaper. She pressed the call button. A minute later, a junior flight attendant, a young woman named Chloe who looked terrified, appeared. Yes, ma'am? Chloe whispered. Could I get some water, please? And maybe some coffee? Chloe nodded vigorously. Of course, Dr. Washington. I'll be right back. Chloe went to the galley. Beatrice heard harsh whispering. The curtain twitched. A moment later, Sheila appeared, holding a plastic cup of water. Not the crystal glass everyone else had. A plastic cup. She set it down on Beatrice's papers with a wet thud, leaving a ring of moisture on the notes. We're out of coffee in the front, Sheila said flatly. Machine's broken. I just saw you serve coffee to the gentleman across the aisle, Beatrice said, looking at the steaming mug in 1F. That was the last of it, Sheila lied effortlessly. You want coffee? You can pay for it. I can bring you one from economy if you have $5. Coffee is included in the first-class fare, Beatrice stated, her voice trembling slightly. Not when we're out of the premium blend, Sheila retorted. And honestly, you look like you've had enough stimulants. Maybe you should try to sleep. You look rough. The insult hung in the air. Mr. Henderson in 2A lowered his newspaper. He had heard it. Excuse me, Henderson spoke up. Miss? Sheila whipped around, her face instantly transforming into a mask of servitude. Yes, Mr. Henderson? Can I get you a refill? No, Henderson said coolly. I'd like you to give Dr. Washington my coffee. I haven't touched it. Sheila's smile faltered. Oh, sir, I couldn't possibly, that's against health codes. Then brew a fresh pot, Henderson said. His voice wasn't loud, but it had the weight of a sledgehammer. I know this aircraft, the Boeing 777-300ER. It has 2 brewing systems in the forward galley. It is statistically impossible for both to be broken and for you to be out of coffee 20 minutes into a flight. Get the doctor a coffee. In a porcelain mug, Sheila stared at him, stunned. She looked from Henderson to Beatrice, her eyes narrowing. She realized she was losing control of the narrative. "Right away, sir," she said through gritted teeth. She returned 2 minutes later with the coffee. She slammed it down on Beatrice's tray so hard that hot liquid splashed over the rim, scalding Beatrice's hand and soaking the edge of her iPad. "Oops," Sheila said, entirely without emotion. "Turbulence." The plane was perfectly smooth. Beatrice gasped, shaking her hand to cool the burn. "You did that on purpose." "Lower your voice," Sheila snapped. "You are disturbing the other passengers. If you continue to be disruptive, I will have the captain restrain you. Do you understand? You just burned me." "I said lower your voice," Sheila yelled, finally drawing the attention of the entire cabin. "God, why do people like you always have to make everything so dramatic? You think because you bought a ticket you own the plane?" Beatrice froze. The racial coding in Sheila's language was undeniable. "People like you." Mr. Henderson unbuckled his seatbelt. But before he could stand, the intercom dinged 3 times a specific, urgent sequence. Ding, ding, ding. Sheila paused. That was the emergency signal. The captain's voice came over the PA, but it sounded strained, panic-stricken. "Cabin crew, please report to the cockpit immediately, and... is there a doctor on board? We have a medical situation in the cockpit." The cabin went silent. The air pressure seemed to drop. Sheila looked at the cockpit door, then back at the cabin. She grabbed the interphone. "Captain? What's going on?" "It's Fred." The first officer's voice crackled, loud enough for the front rows to hear. He's seizing. I can't." He slumped over the yoke. "I can't pull him back. I need help up here." Sheila's face went white. She dropped the phone. She looked at the first-class passengers. "Is anyone a doctor, please?" Mr. Henderson shook his head. The woman in 1F looked terrified. Beatrice unbuckled her seatbelt. She stood up, wiping the coffee from her hand. She looked Sheila dead in the eye. "Get out of my way," Beatrice said. Sheila blinked. "Sit down. We need a doctor, not a—" "I am the chief of neurotrauma at Hopkins," Beatrice barked, her voice projecting with the command she used in the O.R. "And if the captain is seizing, he likely has a cerebral hemorrhage or a cardiac event. I am the only person on this plane who can save him. Now move, or be responsible for this plane going down." Sheila hesitated. Her bias was so deep-rooted she literally couldn't process that the woman in the hoodie was the savior they needed. "Let her through," Henderson roared from row 2. "She's a goddamn surgeon." Sheila stepped aside, trembling. Beatrice didn't look back. She rushed to the cockpit door as the first officer buzzed her in. The door clicked open. Beatrice stepped into the chaos. The drama was no longer about a seat. It was about survival. The cockpit of the Boeing 777 was a world away from the luxury of the first-class cabin. It was a cramped, utilitarian space filled with the smell of stale coffee, ozone, and the sharp, metallic scent of fear. First Officer Dave, a man who looked no older than 25, was white-knuckled on the right-hand yoke. His face was slick with sweat. Beside him, Captain Fred Miller, the man who had dismissively told Beatrice to do as the crew says, was slumped forward, his heavy frame pressing against the control column. The autopilot had disconnected with a shrill cavalry charge of alarms, and the plane was banking dangerously to the left. "I can't pull him back," Dave screamed, his voice cracking. "He's dead weight. He's locked on the stick." Beatrice didn't hesitate. She dropped her knees onto the hard floor between the seats. "Release the harness," she barked. Sheila, who had followed Beatrice into the cockpit despite her earlier protests, stood frozen in the doorway. She was staring at the captain's convulsing body with wide, terrified eyes. "I said release the harness," Beatrice yelled, her voice cutting through the cacophony of alarms. "Sheila, now!" The use of her first name seemed to snap the flight attendant out of her trance. Sheila scrambled forward, her manicured nails fumbling with the buckle. With a loud click, the 5-point harness released. "Pull him back," Beatrice commanded. Together, Beatrice and Sheila hauled the 200-pound man back into his seat. Dave immediately corrected the plane's attitude, leveling the wings. The alarms silenced, leaving only the heavy, ragged breathing of the captain. Beatrice went to work. She placed 2 fingers against Miller's carotid artery. His pulse was thready and erratic. His eyes were rolled back, showing only the whites, and the left side of his face was slack. "Is it a heart attack?" Dave asked, glancing over his shoulder, terror etched on his face. "Do we need the AED?" "No," Beatrice said, lifting Miller's eyelid. The pupil was blown wide, dilated, and unresponsive to light. "It's neurological. Look at the asymmetry. He's postictal, but he's not recovering. He's decerebrate posturing." She ran her hands over his scalp. No trauma. But his blood pressure was likely skyrocketing. "He's having a massive hemorrhagic stroke," Beatrice announced grimly. "Likely a ruptured aneurysm. The pressure inside his skull is building rapidly. If we don't relieve it, his brainstem will herniate, and he will die within the hour." Sheila let out a whimper. We have to land. Dave, where are we?" Dave checked the navigation display. "We're over the North Atlantic, 3 hours from Gander, 4 from Shannon. There's nowhere to put down. Nowhere." "He doesn't have 3 hours," Beatrice said. She looked at Sheila. "He has maybe 20 minutes before the pressure crushes his respiratory center." "So, he's dead?" Sheila whispered, her hands shaking. "Oh my God, Fred is going to die." "Not if I can help it," Beatrice said. She stood up, her head nearly brushing the overhead panel. She turned to Sheila, her eyes blazing with an intensity that made the flight attendant shrink back. "My bag. The leather one you tried to make me check?" Sheila blinked. The one at your seat?" "Yes," Beatrice hissed. "Inside that bag is a prototype for a portable intracranial pressure monitor and relief system. It's the device I'm taking to London for approval. It's the only thing that can save him. Go get it. Now." Sheila hesitated. "But the passengers? They'll see." "I don't care what they see," Beatrice roared. "Run." Sheila turned and fled the cockpit. Beatrice turned back to the captain. He was starting to seize again, a violent, rhythmic shaking that rattled the seat. "Dave," Beatrice said calmly, "you need to fly this plane as smoothly as possible. Can you do that?" I've never flown a transatlantic leg solo," Dave stammered. "I'm just the relief pilot. The senior first officer is sleeping in the crew rest." "Wake him up," Beatrice ordered. "And keep this bird steady. I'm about to perform brain surgery at 38,000 feet." The first-class cabin was in an uproar when Sheila burst through the curtains. She didn't have her service smile anymore. She looked frantic. She ran to seat 1A, dropped to her knees, and dragged Beatrice's battered leather bag out from under the ottoman. Mr. Henderson, watching from 2A, stood up. "Is everything all right? Is the doctor okay?" Sheila looked up at him. For the first time, the arrogance was gone. In its place was sheer panic. "The captain is dying. She says she can save him." She grabbed the bag and sprinted back up the aisle, ignoring the gasps of the other passengers. Back in the cockpit, the situation was deteriorating. Captain Miller's breathing had become irregular, Shane Stokes' respiration. The end was near. Sheila burst in, breathless, handing the bag to Beatrice. "Hold this," Beatrice ordered, shoving a flashlight into Sheila's hands. "Shine it right here. Don't shake. If you shake, I might slip and kill him." Beatrice unzipped the bag. Inside, nestled in custom-cut foam, was the NeuroSafe V2, a device that looked like a cross between a drill and a syringe, attached to a digital monitor. It wasn't approved for commercial use yet. Using it was technically illegal. Not using it was murder. "What are you doing?" Sheila whispered, watching Beatrice wipe the captain's temple with an alcohol swab from the plane's first aid kit. "I'm going to drill a small hole in his skull to drain the excess fluid and blood," Beatrice explained, her voice devoid of emotion. "It will relieve the pressure and buy us time until we can land." "You're going to drill into his head?" Sheila looked like she might vomit. "Here? Unless you have a sterile operating theater hidden in the galley, yes, here." Beatrice shaved a small patch of the captain's hair using a razor from her kit. She positioned the device. The cockpit was vibrating with the hum of the engines. Turbulence bumped the plane. "Dave," Beatrice snapped, "I need smooth air." "I'm trying," Dave yelled back. "We're crossing a jet stream boundary." "Hold him steady," Beatrice told Sheila. "Put your hands on his shoulders. Do not let him move." Sheila, the woman who had sneered at Beatrice's hoodie, the woman who had treated her like a nuisance, now had to trust Beatrice implicitly. She placed her manicured hands on the captain's shoulders. She was trembling. "Look at me," Beatrice said softly. Sheila looked up, tears in her eyes. You can do this, Beatrice said, her voice shifting from command to reassurance, the voice she used for terrified parents. Just hold him. I've got the rest. Sheila nodded, taking a deep breath. She gripped the captain's shoulders. Beatrice placed the tip of the device against the captain's skull, right over Coacher's point. She took a breath. Whir. The sound of the manual drill was sickeningly loud in the small space. It crunched through bone. Sheila squeezed her eyes shut, tears streaming down her face, but she didn't let go. Beatrice worked with the precision of a master. She felt the change in resistance, the drop that signaled she was through the skull, but not the dura. Almost there, she murmured. She attached the catheter. A hiss of air, then the dark, red flow of blood filled the small reservoir tube. The effect was instantaneous. Captain Miller's body, which had been rigid with tension, suddenly relaxed. His breathing, previously jagged and gasping, smoothed out into a rhythmic, deep sleep. Beatrice checked the digital monitor on her device. Intracranial pressure, 18 mmHg. High, but dropping. It had been over 40. Is he? Sheila choked out. He's alive, Beatrice said, taping the device in place. We've decompressed the brain. He's stable. She slumped back against the cockpit door, the adrenaline crashing out of her system. She looked at her hands. They were steady. Dave turned around, his eyes wide. You did it? I bought you time, Beatrice said, wiping sweat from her forehead with her sleeve. But he still needs a hospital. Where are we diverting? Dublin, Dave said. We're cleared for emergency descent into Dublin. 40 minutes. Beatrice nodded. She looked at Sheila. The flight attendant was staring at the blood in the reservoir, then at Beatrice. You saved him, Sheila whispered. I tried to kick you off the plane. Beatrice looked at Sheila, really looked at her. She saw the fear, the realization of her own pettiness crashing down on her. Yes, you did, Beatrice said quietly. You judged me by my hoodie. You judged me by my skin. You decided who I was before I even opened my mouth, and if you had succeeded, Fred would be dead right now. Sheila lowered her head, shame radiating off her in waves. I'm sorry. I didn't know. You didn't want to know, Beatrice corrected. There's a difference. The cockpit door buzzed. It was the senior first officer, finally awake and looking confused. I'll go back to my seat, Beatrice said, standing up. Her legs felt weak. Monitor the pressure. If it goes above 25, call me. She packed her remaining tools. She didn't wait for a thank you. She opened the door and stepped back into the cabin. The scene that awaited her was unexpected. The entire first-class cabin was awake. They had been watching the door. When Beatrice emerged, looking exhausted, with a small smear of blood on her sleeve, the silence was absolute. Then, Mr. Henderson started to clap. It wasn't a polite golf clap. It was a slow, thunderous applause. The woman in 1F joined in. Then the man in 2F. Within seconds, the entire cabin was applauding. Beatrice kept her head down, clutching her bag. She walked to seat 1A. As she sat down, she saw a cup of coffee on her tray table. It was in a porcelain mug. Beside it was a linen napkin. And on the napkin was a note, written on a Skyline Airways coaster. For the doctor. Thank you. The passengers of Flight 492. Beatrice took a sip. It was the good coffee. But the drama wasn't over. They still had to land, and the Skyline elite management was waiting in Dublin. And Greg Poulos? He was about to have a very bad day. The descent into Dublin was a white-knuckle affair. The storm that had delayed them in Chicago seemed to have followed them across the Atlantic, manifesting as a thick, turbulent blanket of gray clouds over the Irish Sea. Inside the cockpit, Beatrice remained strapped into the jump seat behind Captain Miller. Her eyes were glued to the digital display of the NeuroSafe V2. The intracranial pressure was fluctuating 19 mmHg, then 21, then back to 18. Every bump of turbulence sent a spike of fear through her chest, not for her own safety, but for the delicate catheter inside the captain's skull. 5,000 feet, Dave called out, his voice tight. We have crosswinds at 30 knots. It's going to be a hard landing. Beatrice leaned forward, placing a steadying hand on the captain's shoulder to minimize movement. He's stable, she said, loud enough to be heard over the wind shear warning. Just get us on the ground, Dave. Don't worry about being gentle. Just get us down. Sheila stood in the doorway, pale and silent. She had brought Beatrice a bottle of water, but hadn't said a word since the procedure. The shift in power was absolute. The woman who had threatened to throw Beatrice off the plane was now looking at her with a mixture of awe and terrified deference. The Boeing 777 broke through the cloud layer at 2,000 feet, revealing the wet, green patchwork of Ireland and the gray strip of the runway ahead. Rain lashed against the windshield. "Gear down," Dave said. The mechanical whine of the landing gear locking into place was the most beautiful sound Beatrice had ever heard. Thud, screech, thud. The wheels hit the tarmac hard, bouncing once before settling. The reverse thrusters roared, pressing everyone forward against their belts. As the plane slowed from a terrifying velocity to a manageable taxi speed, a collective exhale seemed to ripple through the entire fuselage. "Ladies and gentlemen," Dave's voice came over the PA, shaky but relieved. "Welcome to Dublin. Please remain seated. Emergency services will be boarding immediately." The plane hadn't even come to a full stop at the remote stand when the flashing blue lights of ambulances and police cars surrounded them. Beatrice unbuckled. She carefully detached the monitor from the catheter, sealing the port to ensure no infection could enter the captain's brain. "Good job, Dave," she whispered to the young pilot, who was slumped over the yoke, trembling. "You saved him," Dave said, turning to look at her. I didn't know who you were. I just thought." "You thought what everyone else thought," Beatrice said, her voice heavy with fatigue. "That I didn't look the part." The cockpit door burst open. Two paramedics in high-visibility jackets rushed in, followed by a man in a sharp suit who looked like he had just swallowed a lemon. "What is the status?" the lead paramedic asked, his Irish accent thick. "Acute hemorrhagic stroke," Beatrice said, stepping back to give them space. "Subarachnoid hemorrhage. I performed an emergency bedside ventriculostomy at 35,000 feet. He has a catheter in place, draining to a closed system. ICP is currently 18. He needs a CT angio and immediate neurosurgical intervention to clip the aneurysm." The paramedics stopped dead. They looked at the captain, then at the device taped to his head, then at Beatrice in her hoodie. You drilled into his skull?" the paramedic asked, blinking. "On a plane?" "I had no choice," Beatrice said. "He was herniating." "Right," the paramedic said, snapping into action. "Let's move him. Careful with the line." As they carefully lifted the unconscious captain onto a specialized stretcher, the man in the suit stepped forward. This was Gavin O'Connor, the Skyline Airways station manager for Dublin. He was a man who lived and died by protocol, and what he was seeing was a nightmare of liability. Gavin looked at the blood on the floor. He looked at the medical waste. And then he looked at Beatrice. "Who are you?" Gavin demanded. He didn't offer a hand. He didn't offer thanks. He looked at her like she was a criminal who had broken into a crime scene. "I am Dr. Beatrice Washington," she said, zipping up her leather bag. "I was the passenger in 1A. "A passenger?" Gavin's face turned a shade of purple. "You're telling me a passenger performed invasive surgery on one of my pilots? Do you have any idea the protocols you violated? The FAA regulations? The liability?" Beatrice was too tired for this. "He would be dead if I hadn't." "That's for a coroner to decide," Gavin snapped. He pulled out his radio. "Security. I need a team in the cockpit. We have a passenger who has interfered with a flight crew member and performed unauthorized medical procedures. I want her detained immediately." Sheila gasped. "Gavin, no. She saved him. You don't understand." "Quiet, Garner," Gavin barked. "I'll deal with your report later. Right now, I have a rogue passenger with a weapon," he pointed at the drill sticking out of Beatrice's bag, "who has assaulted a captain." Two airport police officers squeezed into the cockpit. They looked serious. "Ma'am, please step away from the bag and place your hands where we can see them," one officer said. Beatrice felt a cold, hard knot of anger form in her stomach. It was happening again. Even after saving a life, even after performing a medical miracle, she was just a suspect in a hoodie. "I am a neurosurgeon," Beatrice said, her voice low and dangerous. "I have just saved your employee's life. If you arrest me, the PR nightmare will destroy this airline." "I'm protecting this airline," Gavin yelled. "You used unapproved equipment. You're not licensed in Ireland. You're a liability. Get her off the plane." The officers grabbed Beatrice's arms. They weren't gentle. They pulled her out of the cockpit, dragging her into the first-class cabin. The passengers were still there. They had been asked to wait while the medical evacuation took place. They saw the paramedics rush the captain out the front right door, and now they saw Beatrice being marched out like a criminal, flanked by police. What is the meaning of this? The voice boomed from seat 2A. Mr. Henderson stood up, blocking the aisle. He was a tall man, imposing even in his travel wrinkles. "Sir, please sit down," Gavin said, trying to push past. "This is a police matter. This woman is being detained for assault and reckless endangerment." "Assault?" Henderson repeated, his voice rising. "She just saved that man's life. We all saw it. She used a power drill on a pilot," Gavin argued, sweating now. "She's unstable. Look at her. Does she look like a doctor to you?" The cabin went silent. Beatrice looked at Gavin. She stopped struggling against the officers. She stood tall, despite the grip on her arms. "That," Beatrice said, her voice cutting through the silence, "is exactly the problem. I don't look like your idea of a doctor. I don't look like your idea of a first-class passenger. And because of that, you are about to make the biggest mistake of your career." Gavin sneered. "I'm the station manager. I know a lawsuit when I see one. Officers, take her to the holding cell. We'll sort out her credentials if she has any once the lawyers get here." "Let go of her," Henderson said. "It wasn't a request." "Sir, I'm warning you," Gavin said. "Interfering with a police action is a federal offense." Henderson reached into his jacket pocket. The police officers tensed, hands going to their belts. But Henderson didn't pull out a weapon. He pulled out a black leather wallet and flipped it open to reveal a metal card. It wasn't a credit card. It was an ID. "I am Arthur Henderson," he said, "chairman of the board for Skyline Global. I own 51% of the voting shares of this airline." "And Gavin?" Gavin froze. His eyes went to the ID, then to Henderson's face. The color drained from his skin so fast he looked like a ghost. Mr. Chairman," Gavin stammered. I didn't know you were on board. The manifest just said VIP." "Yes," Henderson said, his voice dripping with ice. "And I've been watching you and your crew treat this woman like garbage for the last 8 hours. I watched your flight attendant refuse to hang her coat. I watched her spill coffee on her. And now, I am watching you arrest the finest surgeon I have ever seen in action because you are too bigoted to believe your own eyes." Henderson turned to the police officers. "Gentlemen, if you drag this woman off this plane, I will personally sue your department for unlawful arrest and harassment. Dr. Washington is my guest. She is under my protection." The officers looked at each other, then at Gavin. They let go of Beatrice's arms immediately. Gavin was trembling. "Sir, I was just following protocol." "And the medical device was unapproved." "The medical device," Beatrice interrupted, smoothing her hoodie, "is the NeuroSafe V2. I hold the patent, and it is worth more than your entire pension fund." She picked up her bag from the floor where the officers had dropped it. She looked at Gavin, then at Sheila, who was weeping silently in the galley. "I am tired," Beatrice said. "I would like to get off this plane now. And I would like a car to take me to the hospital. I have a patient to check on." Henderson nodded to her. "My private car is waiting on the tarmac, doctor. It's yours." He turned back to Gavin and Sheila. "You two," he pointed a shaking finger. "Do not go to the hotel. Do not go home. You will wait in the terminal office. I will be there in 1 hour. And you had better pray that Captain Miller survives, because his life is the only thing currently standing between you and a jail cell for criminal negligence." Henderson offered Beatrice his arm. "Shall we, doctor?" Beatrice took it. She walked past Sheila, who couldn't even meet her eyes. She walked past Gavin, who was hyperventilating. She walked out of the plane and into the cool, wet Irish air. She had won the battle in the sky. But as they descended the stairs to the waiting limousine, Beatrice knew the war wasn't over. There was still Greg Poulos back in Chicago, and there was the matter of ensuring Skyline Airways learned a lesson they would never, ever forget. "Mr. Henderson," Beatrice said as they got into the back of the sleek black Mercedes. "Call me Arthur, please," the chairman said, pouring her a glass of sparkling water from the car's console. "Arthur," Beatrice said, taking a sip. "I don't want them fired." Arthur looked surprised. "After how they treated you? Greg at the gate, Sheila, that idiot Gavin? Firing them is too easy," Beatrice said, a slow, determined fire returning to her eyes. "If you fire them, they just go to another airline and treat someone else the same way. No, I have a better idea. Arthur leaned back, intrigued. I'm listening. Beatrice looked out the window at the rain-slicked tarmac. I want to change the culture, and I want to do it publicly. I want full access to your training program. And I want a public apology. Not a press release. A real one. Arthur smiled. It was a shark's smile, but this time, it was on her side. Dr. Washington, I think this is the beginning of a beautiful partnership. But first, let's get you to the hospital. You have a patient to save. Beatrice nodded, closing her eyes. The adrenaline was finally fading, replaced by a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. But she couldn't sleep yet. She had to make sure Fred Miller lived, because if he lived, he would be the greatest witness she could ever ask for. 3 days after the incident, the atmosphere in the executive boardroom of Skyline Airways' London headquarters was suffocating. The room was encased in glass, offering a panoramic view of the city, but no one was looking at the view. At the head of the long mahogany table sat Arthur Henderson. He looked far more imposing in his tailored charcoal suit than he had in the plane seat. To his right sat Dr. Beatrice Washington. She wasn't wearing a hoodie today. She was dressed in a sharp, cream-colored blazer that highlighted the authority she naturally carried. Opposite them sat the 3 people who had made her journey a living hell. Greg Poulos, who had been flown in from Chicago. Sheila Garner, looking pale and gaunt. And Gavin O'Connor, the Dublin station manager, who was sweating profusely. They had been suspended pending this investigation. They thought it was a disciplinary hearing. They didn't realize it was an execution of their careers. This meeting is recorded, Arthur began, his voice devoid of warmth. We are here to review the events of Flight 492. Dr. Washington has been kind enough to join us, despite the fact that she should be celebrating the emergency approval of her medical device, which, I might add, she secured yesterday based on the field data from saving Captain Miller. Beatrice remained silent, her expression unreadable. She studied the 3 of them. Greg was tapping his foot nervously. Sheila was staring at her hands. Gavin was trying to look indignant. Let's start with Chicago, Arthur said, sliding a tablet across the table. It showed CCTV footage from the gate. Mr. Poulos, you blocked a first-class passenger from boarding. You publicly humiliated her. You implied she was lying about her ticket. Why? Greg cleared his throat, his voice cracking. Sir, with all due respect, she didn't look like a first-class passenger. She was wearing a hoodie. We have standards to maintain. I was just protecting the brand image. The brand image, Beatrice repeated softly. She leaned forward. Mr. Poulos, do you know how much that hoodie cost? Greg blinked. No. Probably $20 from a thrift store. It's a limited edition release from the university where I teach. It cost $80. But that's irrelevant, Beatrice said. The shoes I was wearing? Orthopedic runners, because I stand for 14 hours a day saving lives. You looked at my comfort and decided it was poverty. You looked at my skin and decided it was deceit. I followed protocol, Greg insisted, his face reddening. If we let just anyone in the priority lane, she had a valid boarding pass, Arthur roared, slamming his hand on the table. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Your job is to scan tickets, not judge wardrobes. You delayed boarding by 6 minutes because of your ego. Do you know how much 6 minutes costs this airline in fuel and gate fees? Thousands. Arthur turned his gaze to Sheila. And you, Miss Garner. You refused to stow her bag. You served her water in a plastic cup while others got crystal. You spilled hot coffee on a neurosurgeon's hands right before she needed them to perform delicate surgery. And then, when the captain collapsed, you tried to stop the only person who could save him. Sheila looked up, tears in her eyes. I was scared, sir. I didn't know she was a doctor. She didn't have a badge. I told you who I was, Beatrice said calmly, 3 times. You chose not to hear me. You chose to believe that a black woman in row 1A was a mistake, and glitch in your system. You treated Mr. Henderson with respect because he looks like what you think power looks like. You treated me like garbage because I don't. I'm sorry, Sheila whispered. I really am. And finally, Mr. O'Connor, Arthur said, turning to the station manager. You tried to arrest the woman who saved your captain's life. You threatened her with police action while the man was still bleeding on a stretcher. She used a power drill. Gavin blurted out, unable to help himself. It was a liability nightmare. If the captain had died, we would be sued for millions. I was protecting the company from a rogue passenger. She is not a rogue passenger, Arthur shouted. She is a world-renowned surgeon. And do you want to talk about liability? If she hadn't acted, Captain Miller would be dead. And do you know what the liability is for a pilot dying mid-flight because his crew was too incompetent to let a doctor help? It's the end of the airline. Gavin, you almost buried this company. Silence descended on the room. The three employees looked at each other, realizing their defenses were crumbling. Arthur leaned back. Dr. Washington and I have discussed your futures. Beatrice here, he gestured to her, is a better person than I am. She suggested retraining. She suggested we use this as a teachable moment for the entire company. Hope flickered in Sheila's eyes. Greg sat up straighter. However, Arthur continued, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper, I am not as forgiving as the good doctor. I listened to the cockpit voice recorder. I heard the disdain in your voices. I saw the security footage. This wasn't a mistake. This was a culture of arrogance. And I am cutting it out. Arthur pressed a button on the intercom. Security, please escort Mr. Poulos, Miss Garner, and Mr. O'Connor to the exit. Their badges have been deactivated. Their severance packages have been denied due to gross misconduct and endangerment of passengers. You can't do this. Greg stood up, knocking his chair over. I have a union rep. Your union rep saw the footage this morning, Arthur said coldly. He declined to represent you. Goodbye. Security guards entered the room. The three were escorted out, Greg shouting, Gavin weeping, and Sheila walking in stunned silence. They were not just fired, they were blacklisted. In the aviation industry, word travels fast. No reputable airline would touch them. They had insulted the wrong passenger, and the karma was absolute. Once the door clicked shut, the tension in the room evaporated. Thank you, Arthur, Beatrice said. Though I still think retraining the rest of the staff is necessary. Already ordered, Arthur said, smiling. Mandatory bias training for every employee, from the check-in desk to the cockpit, and we're rewriting the dress code policy. Comfort is now acceptable in first class. The door to the boardroom opened again. This time, a wheelchair rolled in. Pushing it was Dave, the young first officer. Sitting in the chair, looking pale and with a bandage wrapped around his shaved head, was Captain Fred Miller. Beatrice stood up immediately. Fred, you shouldn't be out of the ICU. Try stopping him. Dave grinned. He threatened to fly the bed here if they didn't let him discharge. Fred Miller looked at Beatrice. His eyes were clear. The asymmetry in his face was gone. He was weak, but he was all there. He tried to stand, but Beatrice rushed over and put a hand on his shoulder. Sit, please. Fred took her hand. His grip was firm. Tears welled up in the big man's eyes. Dave told me everything, Fred said, his voice raspy. He told me you drilled into my head while we were hitting turbulence. He told me Sheila tried to stop you. He told me I'm alive because you didn't give up. I just did my job, Captain, Beatrice said softly. No, Fred shook his head. You did more than your job. You fought for me when my own crew was fighting you. I have a wife, Doctor. I have 2 daughters. They are flying in tomorrow. I get to see them again because of you. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, gold pin. It was his wings, the pin he had worn for 20 years of flying. I can't fly anymore, Fred said. Medical retirement. But I want you to have these. You earned them more than I ever did on that flight. He pressed the gold wings into Beatrice's palm. Beatrice looked down at the pin, feeling the weight of the moment. She closed her fingers around it. Thank you, Captain, she whispered. 6 months later, Dr. Beatrice Washington was at JFK Airport, waiting for a flight to Tokyo for a medical conference. The NeuroSafe V2 was now standard equipment on every long-haul flight in the world, and Skyline Airways had been the first to adopt it. Beatrice was wearing her favorite charcoal hoodie. It was comfortable. She walked up to the first-class lane. The gate agent, a young woman with a bright smile, looked at her boarding pass, then at her hoodie. For a second, Beatrice tensed, waiting for the comment, waiting for the judgment. The agent looked up. Her eyes went wide. She pointed to a small pin on her lapel, a pin with Beatrice's silhouette on it. It was part of the new company training initiative. Dr. Washington? The agent asked, breathless. The Dr. Washington? Just Beatrice, she smiled. "It is an honor to have you on board," the agent said, stepping aside and unhooking the velvet rope. "Please, go right ahead. And thank you for everything." Beatrice walked down the jet bridge, her sneakers squeaking softly on the floor. She wasn't just a passenger anymore, she was a legend. And as she settled into seat 1A, she knew that things had finally, truly changed. This story reminds us that appearance is never a measure of worth, capability, or status. The flight crew of Flight 492 made the fatal mistake of judging Dr. Washington by her hoodie rather than her character, and it almost cost a man his life. In a world obsessed with image, it is easy to dismiss those who don't look the part, but as Beatrice proved, true power is silent, and true skill doesn't need to dress up to be effective. We must treat every person with dignity, regardless of what they wear or where they sit, because you never know who might be the only one holding the lifeline you need. Karma has a way of balancing the scales. Arrogance is punished, and humility is rewarded. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more dramatic tales of justice and karma, please hit the like button, share this video with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you never miss a story.